Nancy Pelosi just experienced the absolute destruction of her 30-year political career after Speaker Mike Johnson presented a devastating calendar containing 14 suspicious financial transactions and one hidden text message that her parliament permanently erased her signature smile. Throughout her extensive career, the former speaker had always relied upon her trademark facial expression to navigate decades of intense political warfare, including severe government shutdowns and massive impeachment inquiries. She utilized that specific cheerful demeanor exactly like a permanent layer of protective paint, carefully maintained so consistently that its sudden absence would be far more shocking than any other emotion she could possibly display. However, the exact moment the speaker finished reciting the chronological timeline of those specific dates, her legendary composure completely vanished. Before the intense congressional hearing officially commenced, she attempted to preemptively control the narrative. Sitting confidently at the witness table, she adjusted her audio equipment with 2 fingers crossed, her ankles securely out of sight, and folded her hands exactly like an aristocratic host, presiding over an exclusive dinner gathering who knows significantly more than her guests and merely chooses to remain gracious about it. She confidently declared to the entire chamber that her spouse is entirely a private citizen, possessing over 4 decades of highly successful investment experience. She firmly insisted that he executes his own financial decisions, and she possesses absolutely zero involvement or prior knowledge regarding any of his market transactions. She delivered this specific defense with the unhurried and practiced precision of a politician who has recited that exact excuse countless times before and fully plans to utilize it infinitely more times in the future. She dismissively categorized the topic as previously asked and thoroughly answered, claiming she was only participating out of basic respect for the institutional process, rather than possessing any new information to discuss. She had just publicly testified that her husband operates entirely independently. In immediate response, Speaker Johnson organized his presentation featuring 14 highly lucrative market trades directly tied to specific legislative actions she personally controlled, alongside a devastating digital message transmitted the exact night before the most massive transaction occurred. Johnson sat behind a stack of documents arranged so perfectly that their edges appeared laser-cut. Wearing his signature horn-rimmed glasses, with his sleeves formally buttoned to the wrists and his tie pulled tightly to his collar, he projected the exact aura of a highly disciplined constitutional lawyer from Shreveport, Louisiana. Having spent 2 decades meticulously analyzing legal statutes in rooms far less magnificent than this chamber, he possessed a deeply ingrained habit of allowing the raw law to dominate the conversation entirely. He initiated the confrontation by deliberately opening the very first page and introducing a specific. He cited the exact public law authorized in April of 2012, specifically noting its full title regarding the prohibition of trading upon congressional knowledge. Looking up directly at the former speaker, he politely inquired if she was intimately familiar with this particular legislation. Her permanent smile remained entirely unbroken, as she proudly confirmed that she personally helped secure the passage of that exact bill. Johnson immediately weaponized her confirmation, expressing deep appreciation because her direct involvement meant she understood the absolute boundaries of the law. He methodically read the relevant sections aloud, emphasizing that elected officials and their immediate spouses are strictly forbidden from utilizing non-public information derived from their privileged official positions to generate private financial profit. He firmly established that she personally authored the very boundaries she was accused of violating. Having established the legal foundation, he transitioned directly to the devastating chronological calendar. He read the initial pair of dates with the flat and emotionless tone of an educator reading a basic attendance sheet, expecting absolutely nothing in return except the cold historical record. He detailed how, on the 18th of June, In 2020, her husband acquired between $1 and $5 million in highly leveraged call options for the massive parent company controlling Google. Setting the document carefully onto the dark wooden table, he smoothed the paper with his fingertips, utilizing the precise movement of a man who files everything in perfect alphabetical order. He then revealed the crushing legislative parallel, noting that mere weeks after that massive financial acquisition, the specific antitrust subcommittee, where she wielded ultimate influence, suddenly decided against advancing legislation that would have severely damaged large technology monopolies. He placed the second document directly beside the first, aligning their edges until they were perfectly parallel, creating two stark white rectangles against the dark wood. The visual arrangement featured the financial transaction date positioned on the left and the legislative action date on the right. He revealed a massive Microsoft transaction occurring in March of 2021, involving another multi-million-dollar acquisition of call options. He arranged a new page with the exact same deliberate placement. He was carefully constructing a highly visible sequence upon the table where each pair of documents represented a specific station on a timeline, generating a highly disturbing rhythm. This rhythmic pattern consisted entirely of a massive financial trade, followed immediately by a highly favorable legislative outcome. He highlighted that the gap between these specific events always spanned mere weeks rather than months, proving the timeline was far too tight for simple coincidence. Following the Microsoft acquisition, he noted the corporation was suddenly awarded a staggering $22 billion contract with the national military, which was overseen directly by the exact committee structures she completely controlled. He absolutely refused to raise his vocal volume or employ any theatrical emphasis. He simply laid the undeniable dates down exactly like a professional mason laying heavy bricks, building a perfectly level and structurally sound wall of evidence. By the time he reached the third massive coincidence, the attendees in the chamber completely stopped focusing on the individual papers and began staring at the overarching pattern. The isolated papers merely represented raw data, but the undeniable pattern represented a devastating guilty verdict. He detailed another multi-million-dollar acquisition occurring in June of 2022 involving a massive semiconductor manufacturer. Looking directly over the rims of his glasses, he noted that exactly 3 weeks after that specific purchase, the legislative chamber passed a massive $52 billion federal subsidy, heavily favoring that exact industry. He forcefully reminded her that she exclusively controlled the scheduling of the legislative floor, completely deciding exactly when that highly profitable bill would finally reach a vote. A professional journalist seated in the press section completely removed her hands from her typing equipment, staring blankly at the unfolding destruction. He continued his relentless presentation, introducing a fourth devastating example occurring in September of 2024. He revealed a massive liquidation of Visa holdings exceeding $500,000. He emphasized the terrifying timing by noting the federal Justice Department filed a massive antitrust lawsuit against that exact financial corporation the very next day. He repeated the incredibly tight time frame, stressing that the massive stock sale occurred exactly 24 hours before the devastating legal action was publicly announced. The table now displayed 4 distinct pairs of documents, creating 8 separate white rectangles running perfectly parallel like lanes on a massive highway. The chronological distance between the financial transaction lane and the legislative action lane was always suspiciously brief, never allowing enough distance to suggest a harmless accident. Johnson summarized the catastrophic findings, noting 4 massive transactions across 4 distinct corporate sectors spanning 4 separate years. In every single isolated case, the financial maneuvers of her husband perfectly anticipated major congressional actions that she possessed intimate prior knowledge of, long before the general public was ever informed. Removing his glasses and placing them upon the remaining stack, the tiny mechanical click of the folding hinges echoed loudly through the silent room. He flatly declared that her situation completely transcended a simple lucky financial streak, firmly categorizing it as a highly calculated operational calendar. The legendary smile of the former speaker still remained, but it was visibly thinning rapidly. It resembled a fresh coat of paint being aggressively sanded down, allowing the dark grain of the actual wood underneath to suddenly become visible. When she finally spoke, her vocal delivery carried the distinct and incredibly smooth resonance of multi-generational wealth and endless political practice. It was the exact tone of a powerful woman who had spent decades explaining complex concepts to rooms filled with individuals possessing significantly less intelligence, causing her practiced patience to manifest as pure, absolute authority. She unfolded her hands and deliberately refolded them, executing a microscopic physical adjustment designed entirely to broadcast to the room that her posture remained unbroken and her nerves remained completely steady. She fiercely defended her spouse, reiterating his 4 decades of immense success, managing massive capital long before she ever entered the political arena. She proudly noted he constructed a massive venture capital empire, utilizing his own brilliant judgment and capable hands. She characterized the overarching implication that a seasoned financial veteran requires consulting his spouse before executing market decisions as deeply and frankly patronizing. Following this defensive maneuver, her smile widened by exactly 1 microscopic degree, not projecting any genuine warmth, but rather expanding like a heavy door, opening to reveal a hidden threat. She passionately pivoted to the concept of a free market economy, declaring it a fundamental national principle rather than a fractured partisan ideology. She firmly argued that elected officials must retain the absolute right to participate directly within the massive economy they supposedly serve. A loyal political assistant, standing directly behind her, carefully straightened a presentation folder resting upon the table. The assistant executed this incredibly small gesture to physically broadcast confidence, signaling a belief that their defensive argument had successfully restored order to the chaotic room. Johnson patiently observed the assistant complete the minor adjustment before delivering a single devastating counter-argument. He politely agreed with the fundamental concept of a free market economy, but forcefully clarified that he absolutely rejects any market environment where one specific participant is secretly allowed to read the cards before the hand is officially dealt. The hand of the assistant instantly froze upon the folder, entirely abandoning any further attempts to project confidence. Transitioning seamlessly into the terrifying scale of her accumulated wealth, Johnson extracted a fresh document with his signature deliberate care. He directly inquired about her approximate overall net worth. She instantly deflected, claiming she absolutely refuses to discuss private personal finances within such a public setting. He immediately neutralized her defense by reminding her that her financial disclosures are entirely a matter of permanent public record. He delivered the ultimate rhetorical strike by noting those records are publicly mandated entirely because she personally authored the exact transparency laws requiring them. Her own historic legislation was flawlessly weaponized against her, accelerating the devastating gravity of the situation. He cited a prominent analytical platform that actively tracks the stock portfolios of elected officials, utilizing their own mandated disclosure filings. He revealed their estimated calculation of her total net worth sits at a staggering $260 million. He set that massive numerical figure upon the table with extreme caution, exactly like a person placing down an overfilled glass while remaining hyper-aware of a disastrous spill. He then brutally contrasted that massive wealth against her standard congressional salary of roughly $174,000 annually. He noted she had served the public for exactly 37 years. He presented a highly logical mathematical scenario, stating that if she had successfully saved absolutely every single dollar of her taxpayer-funded paycheck for nearly 4 decades, without ever paying a single cent toward taxes or basic housing or daily sustenance, she would have accumulated a maximum possible savings of roughly $6.4 million. Looking directly into her eyes, he repeated the staggering reality that her actual net worth was 40 times greater than what a human being could possibly earn through an entire lifetime of dedicated congressional service. He flatly stated that the mathematical reality absolutely does not function properly within this specific universe, based strictly upon a standard government salary. When she attempted to interrupt by defending the massive success of her husband, Johnson ruthlessly cut her off. He clarified that the most incredibly successful investments in their massive portfolio miraculously coincided with the exact legislation she personally controlled. He categorized this incredible phenomenon not as brilliant business acumen, but as a highly illegal financial cheat code. A stunned journalist tightly gripped their notebook with both hands, appearing genuinely afraid the pages might spontaneously combust from the intense atmospheric friction. Turning another page, Johnson transported the room back to the darkest days of April 2020. He painted a grim historical picture detailing how the federal Paycheck Protection Program had entirely exhausted its funding, leaving thousands of small businesses completely abandoned. He recalled local barbers and dedicated florists and struggling diner owners desperately placing permanent closure signs in their shattered windows. Against this backdrop of massive national suffering, he reminded the chamber that she actively chose to appear on a national television broadcast, standing proudly in front of her massive $24,000 luxury refrigeration unit. He noted she utilized that specific broadcast to proudly display her massive collection of premium frozen desserts, costing $13 per container. He absolutely refused to add any emotional editorializing or unnecessary adjectives, simply delivering the raw numbers with lethal precision. He contrasted the massive cost of her luxury appliance against the completely empty federal assistance programs and the terrifying reality of widespread business collapse. He reminded her that her own local constituents in San Francisco navigate one of the most incredibly expensive living environments on the planet. He detailed how ordinary citizens are completely forced to step over desperate human beings, sleeping in temporary fabric structures directly on the concrete sidewalks every single morning during their daily commute. He noted a tiny studio apartment in her specific district requires nearly $3,000 monthly, while her luxury kitchen appliance completely eclipses what many of those struggling individuals earn in half a year of grueling labor. Her signature smile miraculously remained plastered across her face, but a veteran reporter who had analyzed her political maneuvers for over a decade recognized the structural collapse. Understanding the complex architecture of that specific facial expression, the same way a structural engineer understands load-bearing walls, the journalist hastily scribbled a frantic note, observing that the smile was dangerously thinning. Reaching deeply beneath the remaining stack, Johnson extracted a singular, highly unique page. He deliberately held the document without reading a single word for exactly 3 agonizing seconds. This extended pause served as a massive atmospheric announcement because this specific speaker was entirely famous for never utilizing dramatic pauses. He historically read legal statutes and massive financial figures with the relentless speed of a man racing against the clock. Therefore, his sudden, total silence carried immense, terrifying weight. He calmly announced his intention to recite a highly classified digital text exchange occurring directly between her and her spouse. He clarified this devastating evidence was completely obtained through a highly secure device backup generated under a federal subpoena during a parallel legal investigation. The left hand of the former speaker, which had previously rested comfortably on the table surface, slowly migrated toward the wooden edge, where her fingers gripped the material and completely froze. Johnson began reading the digital communication, utilizing the exact same unhurried and perfectly measured vocal tone he maintained throughout the entire hearing. It was the incredibly casual voice of a legal professional reviewing a standard brief over a relaxed afternoon lunch. The complete and absolute absence of any theatrical drama instantly made the words infinitely louder than any desperate shouting could possibly achieve. He established the exact timeline, noting the digital conversation occurred on the evening of June 16, 2022, which was the exact night before her husband executed the massive multi-million-dollar acquisition of semiconductor call options. Adjusting his glasses, he revealed that her husband sent a digital message at precisely 9:47 in the evening, asking if the highly anticipated semiconductor legislation was going to successfully advance during the current session, or face a frustrating delay. Setting the first printout down, he retrieved the subsequent page containing her direct response, transmitted exactly 5 minutes later. He read her words with a flat domestic tone, exactly like a person reading a mundane grocery list rather than highly classified government intelligence. Her message confirmed the legislation was absolutely moving forward, noting the highest-ranking senator had personally confirmed the schedule. She guaranteed massive floor action within 3 weeks, predicting a substantially large financial number. Somewhere deep within the public gallery, an attendee shifted their physical weight, causing their chair to creak loudly. That tiny mechanical sound traveled violently through the suffocating quiet, exactly like a terrifying crack spreading irreversibly across a frozen lake. He revealed the husband responded instantly with a brief 3-word acknowledgement. Johnson read the incredibly casual phrase, noting it was the exact type of mundane response a person utilizes when informed about minor upcoming weather patterns before deciding to purchase an umbrella. The husband casually noted the highly classified intelligence was incredibly good to know. Looking up from the printed document, Johnson delivered the final devastating exchange with agonizing slowness. He treated each individual word as a separate physical object, setting them down heavily upon the conversational shelf, deliberately spacing them apart to maximize their destructive psychological weight. He revealed her final transmission, sent at precisely 9:54 in the evening, consisted of exactly 7 catastrophic words. She explicitly commanded him not to execute any maneuvers that she would eventually be forced to answer uncomfortable questions about. He placed this final, highly informal document at the end of the long sequence of massive financial trades. The small printout, featuring gray timestamps, looked exactly like a harmless household list until the horrifying implications of the words were fully processed. He repeated the exact 7 words, utilizing the exact same speed and cadence. This repetition was absolutely not for theatrical emphasis, because he completely despised theatricality. It was done exclusively for the permanent historical transcript, ensuring the devastating phrase would exist in the official archives long after the broadcasting cameras were permanently dismantled. He completely destroyed her primary defense by highlighting exactly what she failed to communicate in that critical moment. She absolutely did not command him to halt his trading activities. She did not warn him that she was transmitting highly protected non-public intelligence that was strictly forbidden from being shared. She completely failed to invoke the specific laws she personally helped author. Removing his glasses, he held them loosely in his hand, which remained perfectly still. He clarified that her transmission was absolutely not the communication style of a loyal public servant, maintaining strict operational distance from the massive financial empire of her husband. It was the exact precise communication style of an individual actively handing over highly lucrative insider intelligence while desperately trying to ensure nobody eventually discovered the massive deception. He firmly stated that her singular overriding concern in that dark moment was entirely focused on avoiding eventual detection. The left hand of the former speaker pressed violently downward against the wooden edge of the table, causing her fingertips to instantly whiten from the extreme pressure. And then the legendary permanent smile finally completely vanished from her face. The expression did not slowly fade or gradually thin away. It evaporated instantly, exactly like a brilliant light bulb, immediately dying when a heavy power cord is violently severed. It resembled the terrifying physical release of a desperate individual who had been holding their breath for a highly dangerous amount of time before involuntarily surrendering. 1 second, the legendary political armor was fully intact, exactly as it had been during 30 years of massive state addresses and hostile press conferences. The very next second, it was entirely gone. What remained underneath that vanished smile was absolutely nothing. There was zero trace of defensive anger or desperate fear or crushing grief. There was absolutely none of the standard human vulnerability that occasionally generates public sympathy. The veteran journalist who had documented her entire career entirely ceased writing, completely mesmerized by the horrifying absolute stillness. She witnessed the completely raw physical surface of an individual who had aggressively worn the exact same artificial expression for so many decades that absolutely nothing authentic existed beneath it. It resembled wandering through the terrifyingly bare walls of an empty, abandoned room, representing the completely hollow architecture of a massive career totally stripped of its expensive furniture. Johnson remained entirely seated in his chair, maintaining his folded hands and perfectly level vocal volume. He summarized the absolute devastation encompassing the transparency statutes and the 14 massive transactions perfectly timed to her exclusive legislative control. He highlighted the sickening contrast between her massive $260 million fortune and her luxury kitchen appliances. While local citizens suffered in extreme poverty, he concluded with the ultimate betrayal, emphasizing the digital message, confirming her active participation in the massive deception. He boldly declared that while she had successfully dodged countless inquiries throughout her career, she possessed absolutely no viable answer for that specific message. Setting his glasses back upon the stack, he firmly stated, "The evidence speaks entirely for itself," adding absolutely nothing further. When offered an opportunity to deliver a final defensive rebuttal, the former speaker opened her mouth, attempting to rely upon her historic legacy. She began stating she had proudly served the nation, but suddenly and completely froze. This specific hesitation was entirely unlike any previous political stumble in her extensive career. She did not simply lose her train of thought or experience a sudden failure of nerve. She stopped dead because the absolute next word required to complete her standard defensive phrase was the word integrity. It was a word she had confidently placed at the end of that exact sentence across thousands of massive speeches since the late 1980s. But in this highly specific moment, she found herself entirely physically incapable of vocalizing it. She felt the concept resting heavily in her throat, while her facial muscles attempted to form the necessary syllables. However, the crushing weight of those 7 printed words, currently resting within the permanent congressional record, violently intervened. Possessing the sharp survival instincts forged through 3 decades of brutal political warfare, she instantly recognized that finalizing that specific sentence would result in catastrophic public mockery. Inhaling deeply, she reached up and pointlessly adjusted her audio microphone, which remained perfectly positioned. Her right hand then drifted upward to touch a completely flawless strand of hair. This highly transparent physical gesture was merely the desperate action of an individual requiring physical movement, because her incredible verbal abilities had entirely collapsed. Knowing the entire room recognized the transparent delay tactic, she simply offered a pathetic 4-word surrender, claiming she stands strictly by her historical record. The legendary smile absolutely refused to return. Leaving behind a highly disturbed expression the recording cameras would permanently archive. The broadcast footage immediately fractured into two highly distinct viral phenomena, exactly as digital media always dictates. The incredibly brief 40-second variation focused entirely upon the reading of the digital message, followed instantly by the horrifying physical collapse of her signature smile. This highly concentrated clip exploded past 60 million views before midnight. The global audience obsessively rewatched the footage, not for the legal arguments, but specifically to witness the terrifying quarter-second, where the most carefully manufactured political expression in modern history completely disintegrated, revealing the empty void beneath. The massive 14-minute comprehensive version, featuring the entire chronological destruction, circulated through highly private group communications and family networks, usually accompanied by a simple command, demanding the recipient watch the entire horrifying sequence. The immediate institutional fallout was unprecedented and incredibly rapid. The Federal Exchange Commission officially announced a massive preliminary inquiry targeting the highly suspicious trading patterns of her husband, spanning 4 specific years. 2 prominent senators from opposing political factions executed a highly rare display of absolute bipartisanship, instantly reviving massive legislation designed to permanently ban all elected officials and their immediate families from executing individual market trades. When questioned about the viability of the resurrected legislation, a prominent sponsor boldly declared the devastating calendar made further resistance completely impossible. Meanwhile, highly expensive legal representation for her husband released a completely standard 2-sentence defensive statement, claiming absolute regulatory compliance and full, total cooperation. Everyone in the political sphere perfectly understands that utilizing the word cooperating simply means frantically preparing for a massive legal disaster. That exact same evening, an ordinary working citizen named Ray sat inside his highly modest suburban Maryland apartment, staring blankly at 2 massively different numbers displayed across his computer monitor. On the left side of the glowing screen, his retirement account proudly displayed exactly $40,000. This was the exact devastating amount he completely lost during the terrifying market collapse in the spring of 2020. He had panicked while witnessing endless terrifying headlines predicting global destruction, selling his vital holdings at the absolute lowest possible moment. As a 53-year-old laborer, he completely lacked the financial luxury of losing that massive sum. By the time the massive economy naturally recovered, his permanent losses were completely locked in forever, simply because he completely lacked access to highly privileged individuals whispering secret intelligence regarding the incoming recovery. On the opposite side of his screen, the massive 14-minute viral clip was paused, displaying the staggering $5.3 million profit generated from a single semiconductor transaction. This massive fortune was instantly generated by a man whose spouse conveniently controlled the entire legislative schedule of the national government. Ray stared at the horrific reality of 2 completely different realities operating within the exact same economic system. One ordinary citizen panicked and sold everything at the lowest point, entirely blinded by fear, while an elite insider confidently purchased everything at the exact same lowest point, entirely guided by highly classified legislative intelligence. Ray gently closed his laptop, executing the movement with the profound sadness of a man finishing a highly depressing novel he deeply regrets ever opening. Sitting in absolute silence, he listened to the mechanical hum of his incredibly basic $400 kitchen appliance. His humble refrigerator possessed absolutely zero luxury compressors and completely lacked premium frozen desserts. It merely contained basic milk and highly affordable canned beverages. He painfully realized his devastating financial loss would never be recovered, working his standard labor position. Meanwhile, inside the highly secure speaker office, Johnson relaxed with a simple glass of water while quietly reading his religious text. This was absolutely not a performative political gesture, but rather a deeply ingrained daily habit, representing a few moments of absolute peace before commuting home. Folding his glasses, he sat in the deepening shadows, completely ignoring the massive dollar figures and complex legislative subsidies. His mind remained entirely fixated upon those 7 incredibly simple yet devastatingly horrific words, demanding she not be forced to answer uncomfortable questions. He sat heavily with that specific phrase, processing it exactly like a doctor delivering a terminal medical diagnosis. Understanding the massive political reality had been permanently altered, and those words could absolutely never be unsaid. Thousands of miles away within a highly exclusive luxury estate located in Napa Valley, featuring multiple premium refrigeration units and an incredibly massive private wine cellar, the former speaker stood completely paralyzed in her massive kitchen. She refused to open her luxury freezer. She remained trapped on endless frantic communications with expensive legal counsel and her husband. Her vocal tone lacked any trace of the manufactured public warmth she normally projected. Her signature smile had been entirely removed hours ago, sitting uselessly in a dark drawer, alongside her perfectly crafted defensive talking points and highly calibrated media strategies. She fully intended to reattach the protective armor the following morning when facing the relentless media cameras, but the crushing reality remained unavoidable. The devastating digital message was permanently locked within the historic congressional record, destined to dominate every major global headline by dawn. Absolutely no amount of highly practiced smiling could ever erase those 7 catastrophic words she hastily typed on a completely mundane Tuesday evening to the man she had been married to for over 5 decades. They were the exact type of terrifyingly honest words a person carelessly transmits without thinking, representing the ultimate truth, precisely because they were never ever intended for public consumption. If you are completely exhausted by elite politicians manipulating the system, while ordinary citizens suffer devastating losses, highly engage with this channel. Leave exactly 1 word, representing calendar below, and instantly share this vital information.